morning, you bunch of drunks.
8:39. Welcome to the show, and hopefully you will treat yourself to the Museum of the American Revolution right there in beautiful Philadelphia. And my brother was in town last week. We were helping my mom with some stuff and packing stuff up, doing all kinds of things. And so I said, Paul, you need to, we talked because you're fresh off the opening of the museum, which was on April 19th. I said, buddy, you need to come on the show since you're in town here and talk about this. I have Scott Stephenson on too, and come on. And he's like, I'm not going to come on your show.
Oh, too shy.
He's shy.
Aww.
So I got the babbling brook genes, and he got the creative genes. He got the. So he put together, along with Donald Lawrence Productions, the videos and things like that you're going to see in the walkthrough movie, as it were, in Scott Stephenson's vision. He's the Vice President of Collections, Exhibitions, and Programming. And Scott Stephenson, I'm looking at really a nice write-up. New York Times did a nice write-up about this museum and pointed out that at the start of the exhibition, you are met with a digital recreation of citizens and soldiers in New York pulling down the statue of King George III. And also what I didn't realize is that they melted the statue down and made weapons to fight the British. It's pretty cool.
That's right. They made bullets, more than 42,000 bullets for the Continental Army. They referred to it as melted majesty.
Wow. And you know what's great about this museum, though, is it doesn't gloss over anything. And one of the things people have to realize, and the Times puts it very well because they talk about the drafting the Declaration of Independence, that painting by John Trumbull, and how glorious it looks and how smooth everything looks and how, this is really just a nice little get-together here. But people don't realize that there were some dark times during the Revolution, because once the king was deposed, then what do you do? So there was a lot of trepidation on the part of the colonists and those folks.
Absolutely. I mean, there were people like John Adams, for instance, who were at the forefront of understanding what happens when you tear down a king, you make subjects, and you offer them these powerful ideas like all men are created equal. And, one of the first people to realize the revolutionary potential was none other than John Adams' wife, Abigail Adams, who, of course, writes a letter to John in March of 1776 when she says, I long to hear that you have declared independency, meaning she's anticipating the Declaration of Independence months before it happens. And then goes on to say that in the code of laws that it's going to be necessary to pass to create a new nation, remember the ladies. And so, whether it's ladies, whether it's enslaved people held in bondage, whether it's laboring men who did not enjoy many political rights under the old regime. I mean, we have to remember that the American Revolution was a revolution, that it fundamentally changed society. And, of course, that kind of change is always accompanied with violence, with differences of agreement over what the meaning of those words are. And so it's a big, messy story that involves all of society, and we wanted to try to capture that in the new museum.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me in terms of what came out of this. Were there some people, for instance, some of the founding fathers who said, we need to free the slaves now, and some said no, or were there those kinds of debates that go on, and are we treated to that kind of drama at the museum?
Absolutely. I mean, this was an issue, of course, the practice of slavery existed worldwide into antiquity. I mean, it was something that, while we can, of course, understand that people who are held in bondage resist the institution of slavery, it really wasn't until the beginning of the American Revolution that you started to see a kind of movement of people not held in bondage who begin to see that if you're going to promote these ideas about liberty and about inherent rights that are God-given, that should extend to all of humanity. And so, for instance, the first abolition society is first formed right here in Philadelphia, about a block and a half from where the museum is located in Philadelphia, in 1775. And that begins a process that of course, in the end, is going to consume the nation in the 1860s. Well over 500,000 people will die in resolving that question, which the revolutionary generation failed to answer, which is, do the words "all men are created equal" apply to all people?
Right.
Thankfully, that we have resolved that question now.
Well, and it is interesting, too, because when you see all the tumult in the aftermath of the end of the reign of King George III, you realize that, even by the time, 100 years later, as societies go and as countries go, we were still a remarkably young country, actually remain so.
Absolutely. I think, we are now viewed by many people around the world as sort of a, very old conservative nation. People question the radicalism of the American Revolution, and it's been forgotten that, the United States was the first nation to recognize the independence of virtually every nation that was created until the 20th century, every new nation created by people who rebelled against an old regime. And so, it's worthy of recapturing and remembering what was revolutionary about the American Revolution.
Right, and this just is such a truly living museum, it sounds like, where you have all the life-size figures, and you have the digital productions, and you have the movies, and you have the artifacts, and it really is a groundbreaking approach to a museum as well. I mean, and it's amazing to me there hasn't been a museum of the American Revolution. Isn't that unreal?
Well, there's been many institutions, many museums that have told parts of that story. They've preserved the history of a particular battle or of a city or of a region. Your own Missouri Historical Society there in St. Louis, has done a great job of doing exhibits that tell parts of that story.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a kind of national museum that is, in a sense, a kind of visitor center for the big, broad story of the American Revolution. And so we're 2 blocks from Independence Hall. We're in a place where people from around the nation and around the world, between 2 and 3 million a year, come to connect to that story. And we really think that's the contribution that we're able to make, give you that big, grand, sweeping narrative.
I love how you put that, America's Visitor Center. That's fantastic, and I can't wait to go, and we so appreciate what you've done for our history and for our story, Scott Stephenson, and congratulations and best of luck on the museum. We really appreciate all that you've done, and I'm sure people are going to be, if they go to Philly, they'll be there for sure. So, Scott Stephenson, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor, and thanks to your listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you. At AmRev Museum and amrevmuseum.org.